I found the message at 2:13 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Again, the weight of another failed business pitch still sitting on my chest like a cinder block. The apartment was dark, quiet, too quiet for a man whose whole life used to be filled with the buzz of ideas and late-night laughter from the woman he thought would never leave. And then, there it was, glowing on my phone screen, like a knife held under a spotlight. You need to face the truth, Jake. You're just a loser. I can't do this anymore. Those words didn't come from a stranger, didn't come from some online troll or bitter ex-client. No, they came from my wife, Emily, the woman I'd built my whole life around, the woman who used to hold my hand when we had nothing and whisper that we'd get through it together. She didn't say it in person, didn't even call, just a cold text while I lay awake battling my demons in silence. And you know what hit hardest? The fact that I wasn't even surprised. The signs had been there for months, maybe years, the way she stopped asking how my day went, the way she always seemed to be texting someone late at night with a little smile she tried to hide, the way she stopped calling me babe and started calling me Jake like we were roommates who barely tolerated each other, but I kept ignoring it, kept telling myself that things would turn around once I landed that one big deal, the one that would pull us out of this mess and make her proud of me. Again, but that deal never came, and she'd finally had enough. I got out of bed, heart pounding, palms sweaty, and walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water just to stop my hands from shaking, and stared at the fridge where our wedding photo used to hang. She must have taken it down while I was out trying to pitch to some venture capitalist who didn't even show up. All that was left was a faint square where the light hadn't faded the paint, like even the wall wanted to forget us. At first, I thought maybe it was just anger talking, maybe she'd come back in the morning, maybe we could fix it, we'd been through worse, right? But by 7 a.m., I found the email, formal, cold, typed up like a resignation letter. I've filed for divorce. I'll be staying with friends for a while. Please respect my decision. Friends, right, I knew exactly which friend she meant. I'd seen them on Instagram 2 weeks ago, her and some guy with that smug Wall Street look, polo shirt, boat shoes, and teeth too white to be natural, standing on the deck of a yacht somewhere in the Bahamas. She said it was a girl's trip, but there he was, arm around her waist like he'd always belonged there, and she didn't pull away, didn't hide it, just smiled into the camera like she'd already left me in her heart and this was just the paperwork catching up. I didn't scream, didn't punch a wall, didn't even cry. I just sat on the floor, back against the dishwasher, staring at the floor tiles and wondering how the hell I ended up here. How I went from being the guy who took risks and dreamed big to the man who couldn't even hold on to his own wife. I felt humiliated, broken, like a used-up version of the man I once promised her I'd become. And then, like a sick twist in a cruel joke, 2 days later, she posted a picture of herself on that same yacht again, this time with a caption that read, "Grateful for second chances and real love." I almost laughed. It was so cliché I could taste the Hallmark card she must have copied it from, but deep down, that laugh curdled into something else, something hot, bitter, and cold all at once. I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. I wanted to scream at her, ask her how she could do this to me, to us, after everything, but I didn't. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't beg. Instead I did something she never expected. I shut down, turned everything off, went silent. I packed up the apartment, gave away the couch we picked out together, burned the old business plans, and disappeared. Everyone says rock bottom is where you find out who you are, but that's not true. Rock bottom is where you find out who you used to be, and if you hate that person enough, maybe you finally build something new, something stronger, something that can't be taken away by a text at 2 a.m. I moved into a tiny one-room rental over a mechanic's garage on the edge of the city. The place smelled like oil and broken dreams, but it was quiet, private, and had just enough space for a mattress and a desk, and that was all I needed. I got a job washing cars during the day and spent every night teaching myself everything I could about digital marketing, e-commerce, branding, SEO, every buzzword I used to throw around in meetings but never truly understood. I worked like a man possessed, like someone trying to claw their way out of a grave they dug themselves, and in 6 months, I launched my first online store. Nothing fancy, just handmade leather goods sourced from a guy I met at the garage who'd been crafting wallets in his basement for years. We made a simple site, slapped a brand name on it, and pushed it through Instagram like our lives depended on it, because mine did. And then something clicked. An influencer picked it up, tagged us in a post, and boom, orders exploded overnight. I was working 20-hour days, shipping products, managing ads, responding to customer service emails myself, sleeping 2 hours at a time, living off instant coffee and revenge-fueled adrenaline, and somehow, for the first time in years, I felt alive. By the end of year 1, we hit $1.3 million in revenue. Yeah, you heard me right, $1.3 million. I bought a small office space, hired a real team, launched 2 more brands under the same umbrella, all centered around simple, high-quality, story-driven products, and by the end of year 2, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, and nobody knew, not even Emily, because I never posted about it, never bragged, never said a word. Until one day, I got a text from an old mutual friend, Melissa. She was throwing a birthday party downtown, fancy rooftop place, open bar, catered food, the works, and she wanted me to come. "You've been a ghost, Jake," she said, "you've got to show your face again," and I almost said no, almost stayed in my safe little empire where no one could hurt me again. But then she added, "Oh, and Emily's gonna be there, with her husband." And just like that, something inside me shifted. I picked out the best suit I owned, the one tailored in Italy with a subtle navy pattern, put on the Rolex I bought but never wore, and drove to that rooftop like a man on a mission, and when I walked in, heads turned, but none as fast as hers. She looked right at me, glass halfway to her lips, eyes wide, jaw slightly parted, and I swear, for just a moment, the guilt hit her before the curiosity did. "Jake," she said, and I smiled, slow and calm like I hadn't spent a single night thinking about her since she left. "Emily," I said, "you look exactly the same." And that was when I knew I had her attention again. But this time, I was going to do things on my terms. This time, I wasn't the loser in the story anymore. There was a beat of silence, just a few seconds, but long enough for the music and laughter around us to fade into nothing. It was like time paused just for us, standing there on that rooftop, 2 people who once swore they'd never hurt each other now locked in the kind of stare you only see in courtrooms and nightmares, and when Emily finally blinked, I saw it, that flicker of disbelief, of uncertainty, and maybe even something close to regret. "Wow, Jake, I didn't know you'd be here," she said, her voice softer now, with a nervous laugh like she was trying to pretend everything between us had been water under the bridge, like she hadn't gutted me and walked away without looking back. "Yeah," Melissa insisted, I said, glancing around casually, didn't want to disappoint her, and then I looked her up and down once, not with desire, but with detachment, like I was inspecting an old piece of furniture I used to love but now saw clearly, all the scratches, the flaws, the fading veneer. She looked good, she always did, but there was something different about her now, not just the way her eyes darted like she was searching for the upper hand, but the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, like she was trying to be charming out of habit, not feeling. Before she could say anything else, a man walked up behind her, tall, square-jawed, expensive watch, smug energy that could choke a room full of strangers, and I knew instantly, this was him, the guy from the yacht, the one she traded me for when I was down and bleeding. "Babe," he said, slipping an arm around her waist and giving me a once-over that dripped with the kind of arrogance only rich men think they've earned, "aren't you going to introduce me?" She hesitated for just a moment before saying, "Jake, this is Brandon, my husband," then added quickly, "Brandon, this is Jake, my ex." There was a pause, and I could see Brandon processing that, like he just realized the man standing in front of him wasn't some sad story she left in the past, but someone who didn't look the least bit broken now, someone standing taller than he probably imagined. "Ah," he said, reaching out his hand like he was offering me a job interview, "the entrepreneur, right? Emily mentioned you had a few ventures." I shook his hand, firm and calm, looked him dead in the eye and said, "Yeah, I've got a few. They're doing all right these days." He smirked, but I could see the confusion behind it, and that's when Emily spoke again, a little too quickly. "What are you up to now, Jake? I mean, it's been a while. Last I heard." She trailed off, and I smiled, not wide, just enough. "Oh, you know," I said, sipping my drink, still building. "Things took off, actually. Just closed on a new office building last week. Our 3rd this year." Her lips parted slightly, and I saw her do the math in her head, trying to reconcile the version of me she left, the guy who couldn't keep the lights on, with the one standing here now, polished, composed, and clearly no longer beneath her. Brandon frowned. "What kind of business?" "E-commerce. Branding. Media assets. Little bit of everything," I said smoothly. "We've got some good people. Strong margins. But hey, enough about me, how's the yacht life?" He chuckled, like he thought I was joking, but Emily didn't laugh, she was still staring at me, and I could feel the shift, that moment when someone realizes the person they discarded didn't just survive, they evolved, and now they're dangerous. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversations, clinking glasses, and a dozen people pulling me aside to ask where I'd been hiding, congratulating me on my comeback without even knowing the full story, and the entire time, I could feel her eyes on me, every time I spoke, every time I smiled, every time I so much as loosened my tie, she was watching, and I could feel it in my bones. Later, as the party began to thin out and the city lights shimmered like 1,000 quiet witnesses, I stepped out onto the balcony for some air, and a few minutes later, I heard heels behind me. "Jake," she said, softer now, almost hesitant, "can we talk for a second?" Alone. I turned slowly, leaned on the railing, and looked at her without speaking. She took a breath, brushing her hair behind her ear the way she used to when she was nervous, and said, "You look different." "Yeah," I replied, "life has a way of doing that." She didn't smile, not really, just looked down at the street below, like she couldn't face me when she said what came next. "I didn't expect to feel like this, seeing you again." I waited. "I thought you'd be angry," she continued, "or bitter." "Oh, I was," I said, "but then I realized something, anger only holds power if you let it." I stopped letting it. She looked up at me then, and her eyes shimmered just a little too much under the glow of the rooftop lights. "I made a mistake, Jake." I let that hang in the air, didn't rush to fill the silence, just watched her wrestle with it, and it was glorious, in a slow, quiet, painful way. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she added, "I just needed to say it. I messed up. You were always trying. You never stopped fighting. I gave up." "You didn't just give up," I said calmly, "you left. You lied. You replaced me before the dust even settled." She flinched, and I almost felt something, almost. "I didn't mean for it to happen that way," she whispered. "Brandon was just there, and I thought maybe he could give me something you couldn't." "And did he?" I asked, looking her dead in the eyes. She hesitated too long. I laughed, low and dry, and turned to leave, but she reached out, touched my arm, and said the words that changed everything. "Do you ever miss us?" I stopped walking. "I miss the men you used to be," she said, "but I'm also drawn to the men you've become." And that was when I knew I had her. Not because I wanted her back, not because I loved her, but because she couldn't stand that I'd rebuilt without her, that I was stronger now, and untouchable, and everything she once wanted but didn't believe I could become. So I looked at her and said, "Maybe we should catch up sometime. Talk. Properly." She nodded, a little too eagerly. "I'd like that." And just like that, the first seed was planted. She didn't know it yet, but she was already walking into the trap she built with her own hands. And I was done being the man who begged to be loved. Now I was the man who held the pen. And I was going to write the ending she never saw coming. She texted me that night. Just one message, I meant what I said. I stared at the screen for a long time, the glow of it lighting up the otherwise dark room, and I couldn't help but think how strange it was that a woman who once left without a word beyond legal papers now couldn't stop trying to open the door again, the same door she slammed shut like it was never worth looking back. I didn't reply. Not yet. That wasn't how this part would go. She needed to wait. She needed to wonder. Because that's what she made me do, day after day, while I stared at the empty side of the bed, questioning if every word she'd ever said had been real or just something she told herself to get through the guilt, while she was off in some coastal resort with Brandon, sipping overpriced wine and playing the role of the woman who made the smart choice. I wasn't going to hand her anything now, not forgiveness, not even closure, not until she asked for it, and even then, I'd only give her pieces. I let 2 days pass. Then, casually, as if it didn't matter, I sent her a short reply, "Maybe we should talk. You free Thursday?" She responded in less than a minute, "Yes. Anywhere. Anytime." Of course she was. We met at a quiet wine bar downtown, the kind of place she used to hate because the menus didn't have pictures and the waiters didn't rush, but now she sat across from me pretending she belonged there, swirling her glass like she'd been doing it her whole life. "You look calm," she said, watching me closely. "I am," I replied, leaning back in my seat. "Peace is expensive. But worth it." She smiled, but it was tight, almost nervous, and I could see her trying to read me, trying to gauge how much of the old Jake was still in there, whether I was vulnerable enough to slip back into her grasp. I wasn't. We talked for over an hour. She asked about my business, about how I got back on my feet, about the people I was working with now, and I could see it, the regret creeping into her expression like wine staining white fabric. She laughed a little too loudly at my jokes, touched my hand just a second too long when I reached for my drink, and the way she looked at me, God, it wasn't love, it was possession. She wanted back what she gave away. And I let her believe it was working. When we left, she lingered outside by my car. I've missed this, she said, her voice quieter now, almost afraid of her own honesty, talking to you, feeling like this. Like what? I asked. She hesitated, then said, safe. Seen. I didn't smile. I just unlocked the car. I'll call you, I said, and drove off. But I already knew the next move. This wasn't about rekindling something lost, it was about showing her that what she once broke had become something untouchable, and now she would feel that distance, every inch of it, every day. Over the next few weeks, we met more often. Always in secret, always with that tension simmering between us. She didn't say the word affair, but we both knew what this was. I never pushed. She always initiated. Coffee turned into late-night drinks turned into kisses, kisses turned into nights spent tangled in old memories and new guilt. She started venting about Brandon. He's never around, she said one night, curled up beside me, her voice heavy with disillusion. He thinks money replaces time. He doesn't get me like you did. I almost laughed. Because she once left me for that same money, thought it could buy her happiness, security, love. Now she was choking on it. You chose him, I said, without malice. I know, she whispered, and I hate myself for it. And that's when I knew she'd cracked. She was vulnerable, uncertain, maybe even in love again, or whatever broken version of love she was capable of now. And I was recording everything. The conversations, the moments, the soft admissions of guilt and discontent. I had it all. Hidden mics, cloud backups, timestamps. Because this wasn't revenge driven by rage. It was colder than that. Calculated. I wanted to destroy the illusion she sold to Brandon, that she was this loyal, classy trophy wife, that he'd won her heart clean, that she was his prize. I wanted to show him exactly what kind of woman he'd invested in, and I wanted her to see what it felt like to be discarded, not by force, but by choice. One evening, we sat at my place, lights low, her curled up in one of my sweaters like we were 23 again and broke but happy, and she said it. I don't think I ever stopped loving you, she breathed, eyes glassy, lips inches from mine. You left me, Emily, I said, soft but sharp. I know, she said, and I hate myself for it. Every single day. I kissed her, slow and deep, and when we fell back into bed that night, I knew this would be the final piece. There were no graphic details. Nothing explicit. But what I recorded was more than enough, her whispering that she still loved me, that she wished she'd never left, that Brandon was a mistake, that she could see a future with me again. 2 days later, I sent an anonymous email to Brandon. It was short and simple: you should know what your wife's been doing while you're busy making deals. Attached was a link to a private drive. That night, while she texted me, miss you and can't wait to see you again, her world was already beginning to burn. The next morning, she didn't message. By noon, she was calling. By 3 p.m., she was at my office building, waiting in the lobby like a ghost that had forgotten where it belonged. I met her in the lounge. She looked pale, shaken. You did this, she said, voice breaking. I didn't deny it. He'd kicked her out, frozen the joint accounts, had his lawyers serve her within hours, and just like that, the life she'd left me for was gone. You ruined me, she said, tears welling in her eyes. No, I replied, you did that. I just handed you the mirror. She sank into the leather chair across from me, shoulders shaking, mascara running, and for a moment, I almost felt something like pity, but it passed. Why, Jake, she asked, why go this far? I looked at her, steady and unblinking. Because you called me a loser when I was already on my knees, I said, my voice flat, because you traded love for leverage. And because people like you don't learn unless they lose everything they tried to steal. She sobbed, silent and ashamed, and I stood up, straightened my jacket, and looked down at her. You always said I was good at building things, I added, you just didn't think I'd learn how to destroy. Then I walked away. And for the first time in years, I felt nothing but power. You always imagine revenge will feel like fire, like lightning crashing through your chest, something loud and bright and final, but the truth is it's quiet, cold almost, like waking up in a room you used to know and realizing all the furniture's gone and the windows don't face the same direction anymore. After I left her crying in that leather chair, I didn't look back, not once, not even when I heard her whisper my name, not even when the security guard asked me if he should escort her out. I just nodded, walked to the elevator, and felt this strange weight lift off my chest, the kind that had been pressing down for months, maybe even years. I couldn't tell anymore, because sometimes the pain becomes part of your skin and you don't even notice how tight it is until someone peels it off. It took her 2 days to stop calling, 5 to stop texting, and 7 to completely vanish from my digital world. No more likes, no more subtle story views, nothing. A blackout. Like she had evaporated, and honestly, that was the first gift she ever gave me that didn't come with a price. But peace, as it turns out, isn't silent. It speaks in memories, in echoes. I'd sit in the office late at night, the kind of late where the city's just a hum in the distance, and I'd find myself staring at the skyline, wondering how we got here, not just her and me, but me, this version of myself, the one who could look someone in the eyes and lie without flinching, manipulate without guilt, win a war without even raising his voice. Because I'd won. By every definition, I had taken back the power, reclaimed the respect, destroyed the illusion she had tried to live inside. But now what? I had money, more than I could ever spend. I had people working under me who once laughed behind my back. I had friends, well, business associates, who toasted to my success and whispered that I was unstoppable. And I had my name in articles, interviews, podcasts, all painting me as this comeback king, this genius who turned failure into fortune. But at night, when the world was quiet, I kept asking myself the same question. Was I better now, or just colder? That question stayed with me, even as life kept moving. Deals closed, new clients signed, and I kept climbing, higher and higher, but the air up there. It's thin, lonely. You start to realize that revenge gives you clarity, but not comfort. About a month after everything with Emily blew up, I ran into her sister at a bookstore of all places, some niche little spot tucked between a cafe and a gallery. We used to come here, years ago, back when we were still pretending we were bohemian intellectuals instead of two people scared of becoming boring adults. Jake, her voice came from behind me, soft, unsure. I turned and there she was, Claire, Emily's younger sister. She looked the same, maybe a little older around the eyes, but still kind, still too honest for her own good. Claire, I nodded, hey. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I heard what happened, she said carefully, with with everything. I didn't say anything at first. Just waited. She sighed and looked down at the book in her hand. She's a mess, she said, staying with our mom for now. Brandon changed the locks, shut off the cards, even took back the car. It's bad. Actions have consequences, I said, maybe a little colder than I meant to. Claire winced. She was wrong, Jake. I know that. But she's still human. She made a terrible mistake, but I don't think she ever stopped loving you, not really. I looked her in the eye. Then she had a funny way of showing it. Claire didn't argue. She just nodded slowly. Maybe, she said, but I figured you should know. She's not the only one hurting. And then she walked away. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I felt guilt, I didn't. But because for the first time since everything happened, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Sadness. Not for her. Not exactly. But for who we used to be. For the mornings we made coffee in that tiny kitchen, for the inside jokes, for the way she used to fall asleep mid-movie and swear she didn't, for the little things, the details that die so slowly you don't even notice they're fading until you're holding a ghost of a memory and realizing it doesn't make you smile anymore. I didn't regret what I did. But I finally mourned what I'd lost. And in that morning, something changed. I stopped answering the calls from reporters. Stopped accepting invites to lavish parties and dinners I didn't care about. I scaled back, not everything, but enough to breathe again. I took mornings off. I walked without a destination. I read books that didn't have bullet points or business models. And I started talking to my father again. We'd had a rough stretch after Emily left, mostly because he thought I should have moved on quicker, gotten back in the game, found someone new. I didn't raise you to fall apart over a woman, he'd said. No, I'd replied back then, you just never taught me how to survive one leaving. But now, we were finding our way again. Not through big speeches, just little things. Fishing trips. Sunday football. Silence that wasn't uncomfortable anymore. He never said he was proud. But I could see it. And maybe that was enough. About 6 months later, I saw Emily one last time. It wasn't planned. I was at a charity event, something my assistant signed me up for because it looked good on paper. She was there, across the room, standing alone in a simple dress that looked 2 years old and 2 sizes too loose. Her eyes met mine. And there was no drama. No words. Just a nod. A small, almost invisible nod. As if she finally understood. I nodded back. And that was it. No begging. No speeches. No rekindling. Just 2 people who had burned each other down, now standing among strangers, pretending the ashes weren't still on their sleeves. And honestly, that moment gave me more closure than any confrontation ever could. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't punish someone. It's heal past them. And I was healing now. Not because I'd won, not because I'd crushed her. But because I finally realized I didn't need her to be broken for me to feel whole. She was gone. The version of me that needed her, he was gone too. And in his place, a man who had rebuilt everything. Including himself. Time is strange, especially when you're not looking at the clock anymore, when you stop counting days since the betrayal, weeks since the last message, or months since the storm passed. You just live, one breath at a time, and sometimes that's enough, more than enough actually, to feel like you're whole again. I didn't think I'd see her again after the charity event, and to be honest, I didn't plan to. It felt finished, like a book you close not because it ends happily but because you finally read it enough times to know how every chapter plays out, and yet, life's funny that way, it always reserves the right to surprise you when you least want it to. It was a Friday, early spring, one of those rare afternoons where the breeze feels clean, like it scrubbed the city before showing up. I had just wrapped up a meeting with a tech startup we were investing in, nothing particularly dramatic, just numbers and projections and more dreams than experience. I liked them though, they reminded me of myself back when I still thought ambition could fix everything. I walked into a small cafe a few blocks away, the kind of place that plays soft jazz and serves coffee in ceramic cups that don't match, and I was halfway through my espresso when I heard that voice. Jake. It was softer than I remembered, unsure, like it didn't belong to the same woman who once called me a failure and walked out the door with suitcases full of both clothes and contempt. I looked up, and there she was. Emily. No makeup. Hair tied up in a messy twist. A hoodie that had clearly been washed 100 times. No diamond earrings. No heels. Just her. She looked at me like she wasn't sure if she should smile or leave, and for a second, I wasn't sure either. But I nodded toward the chair across from me, and she sat down, carefully, like she was afraid the weight of the moment might crack the seat. I didn't think I'd ever see you in a place like this, she said after a long silence. You always liked the slick hotel bars with overpriced wine. I used to, I said, sipping slowly. I think I liked the illusion more than the wine. She laughed quietly, then looked down at her hands, fingers trembling slightly. She was nervous, I could tell, and that caught me off guard, because for so long, I was the one who used to tremble in front of her. How have you been? She asked, and I could tell it wasn't just a formality, she really wanted to know. I've been better, I said truthfully, stronger. Wiser. Less bitter. She nodded. You look good, she said, different, but good. So do you, I lied. She looked like a memory you didn't ask for but stumbled across anyway, faded, frayed around the edges, but familiar. Then the pause came, the one where the air feels like it's leaning in, waiting for something real to happen. I miss you, she said suddenly, eyes glassy. I miss us. And there it was. The trapdoor. The opening. The line that years ago would have unraveled me like thread. But I didn't flinch. I don't think you miss me, I said, voice low. I think you miss who I became without you. She looked like I slapped her. Not hard. But deep. You think I came here to, what? Crawl back into your life because I saw you on Forbes. Didn't you? I asked, not unkindly, but directly. Claire told me how Brandon cut you off. I'm guessing your options got limited. She bit her lip, hard enough to leave a mark. I made mistakes, she said, voice cracking, I know that. But I didn't come here for money. Or for pity. I came because I've had nothing but time to realize how badly I messed up. You were a good man, Jake. You were my good man. And I threw that away. And for a moment, I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted to. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal, the affair, the divorce papers she shoved at me like a final verdict, I had loved her once in a way that left fingerprints on every part of me. But I wasn't that man anymore. And she wasn't that woman either. I don't hate you, Emily, I said, I did. For a long time. But now. I just see you for what you are. Someone who wanted more than I could give at the time, and when you thought I had nothing left, you didn't just walk away, you burned everything we had. Tears welled in her eyes. You think I don't live with that every day, she asked, voice trembling, you think I don't regret it? I have nothing, Jake. I lost everything. No, I said, you lost me. Everything else was just decoration. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand, and I didn't pull away. Just one night, she whispered, let me remember what it felt like to be yours. I looked at her, really looked at her. And I realized something. This wasn't about love. It was about memory. About guilt. About loneliness. I nodded once. And that night, she came back to my place. We didn't talk much. Just silence filled with unspoken things, with history, and dust and shadows. She looked around my penthouse like she was trying to absorb it, like she was memorizing details for later, and part of me pitied her, for needing this, for thinking it could fix anything. What she didn't know was that the cameras were already running. Hidden. Subtle. Legal, thanks to the waiver she unknowingly signed when she walked in, one of those NDA forms masked as a security document. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it for closure. The next morning, she was quiet. Woke up early. Dressed slowly. Thank you, she said softly, for letting me feel something again. And then she left. 2 days later, Brandon got the video. I didn't send it with a message. I didn't need to. The image spoke louder than any explanation ever could. And just like that, Emily was alone again. Truly alone. You'd think that moment would have filled me with satisfaction. But it didn't. It just felt empty. Not because I regretted it. But because revenge always leaves a residue, like smoke after a fire, it's gone, but it lingers in your lungs, reminding you that even justice has a cost. I wasn't proud of what I did. But I wasn't ashamed either. I was simply done. And sometimes, that's the only way to move forward. By closing the last door, even if you have to lock it from the outside. There's something no one tells you about revenge, it never really ends when you want it to, it lingers, like the smell of smoke on your clothes after a fire you started, even if the fire was justified, even if the house deserved to burn. The morning after I sent the video, I sat in my living room, staring out over the skyline, my coffee went cold in my hand, and I wasn't thinking about Emily, or Brandon, or what the fallout would be, I was thinking about silence, about how loud it gets when everything you wanted has already happened, but the satisfaction doesn't come rushing in like you expected. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up at my door in tears or rage, and I didn't want her to. I didn't care what happened between her and Brandon, whether he left her, whether he humiliated her in return, whether he forgave her, I didn't care because it wasn't about them anymore, it never truly was, it was about me. And what surprised me most was that after all that build-up, after the planning, the emotional torture, the self-restraint, and the execution, I still didn't feel free. I felt hollow. Don't get me wrong, there was a moment, just a flicker of it, when I saw Brandon's name flash across my screen after he opened the video, and I allowed myself to smirk, just once, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I knew he saw exactly who she really was, stripped of all illusion. But that moment passed quickly. Because I realized something more important. I wasn't that man anymore either. I was no longer the broken guy staring at bank statements in the dark, wondering where it all went wrong. I was no longer the one chasing validation through success or revenge. I had changed. But I had changed because of the pain, not in spite of it. And with that realization came something unexpected, peace. Not the loud, dramatic kind of peace where you shout, "I won," to the sky and feel vindicated. no. This was quieter, like a deep exhale after holding your breath for years. That same week, I took a trip out of the city, no assistance, no driver, just me and the road. I needed to get away from the noise, from the empire I'd built, from the screens and the meetings and the ever-turning wheels of ambition. I ended up in a small coastal town where no one knew who I was. I booked a modest Airbnb with a view of the ocean and spent hours just walking along the shore, letting the salt air clean out the parts of me that still felt stained. One morning, I sat on the porch with a notepad and started writing. Nothing dramatic, no plans, no schemes, just thoughts, moments, reflections. I wrote about my father, about the first time I ever felt like a failure, about the night Emily left and how quiet the apartment felt after the door shut behind her. I wrote about the business that almost broke me, and the people who didn't walk away. And as I wrote, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was grateful. Because if none of it had happened, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have built something real, not just the company, but myself, from the inside out. I spent 3 weeks in that town, and not once did I check the news, or look at stocks, or read a message from anyone in my old life, and it felt good. One afternoon, as I watched the tide come in, an older man sat next to me on the bench. He looked to be in his 70s, face weathered but calm, like someone who's made peace with time. "You from around here?" he asked, casually. "No," I said, "just passing through." He nodded. Sometimes passing through is exactly what a man needs. We didn't talk much after that, but I never forgot what he said. Because it stuck with me. He was right. Sometimes you don't need to build more, buy more, win more. Sometimes you just need to let the current take you somewhere quiet. When I got back to the city, everything was still where I left it, my apartment, my staff, my life, but I was different. I started cutting back on meetings, turning down deals that didn't sit right with me, spending more time with people who weren't chasing anything except authenticity. One night, I was at a friend's dinner party, someone I'd known for years, the kind of friend who doesn't care how many zeros are in your bank account, and I met someone. Her name was Lara. She wasn't flashy, didn't wear designer clothes or drop names. She was an architect, sharp-witted, quiet confidence, the kind of woman who listens more than she talks, and when she speaks, it matters. We talked for hours that night, about books, about travel, about childhood regrets and guilty pleasures. Not once did she ask me what I did or how much I made. She didn't know about Emily, or the business, or the headlines. She just knew me as Jake. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. As weeks passed, we kept seeing each other, not in penthouses or cocktail lounges, but in bookstores, art galleries, random cafes with bad lighting and great pastries. And slowly, something I thought was broken in me began to repair itself. One night, she asked me, "What's the hardest thing you've ever done?" I thought about it for a while. And then I told her the truth. Letting go, I said, of the version of myself that needed to be someone else just to feel worthy. She looked at me for a long time before saying, "Then I guess the hardest thing made you the best version of you." That stayed with me. Not because it was poetic, but because for once, I didn't feel like I was still proving something, not to her, not to the world, not even to myself. You see, when Emily left, she wasn't just walking out on our marriage, she was walking out on me, the real me, and in a twisted way, she gave me the chance to find that man again. Not by chasing her. Not by hurting her. But by becoming someone who no longer needed her approval, or anyone's. And maybe that's the real victory, not the empire, not the revenge, not the recognition, but the quiet strength of standing in your own skin and knowing, finally, that it fits. By the time I saw Emily again, almost a year later, I barely recognized her, not because she looked different, though she did, but because I didn't feel anything anymore. No anger. No sadness. No need to prove anything. She walked past me at another event, this time without stopping, without pretending, just a faint, awkward smile before disappearing into the crowd. And you know what? That moment, it felt like freedom. You'd think the end of a story like this would come with fireworks, applause, or some cinematic monologue where I look into the sunset and say something profound, but that's not how it happened. It ended quietly. No grand confrontations, no final insults, no emotional breakdowns in the rain. Just stillness. I remember the night it really hit me that I was free, not just from Emily, or from the marriage that had become a prison, but from the need to ever go back to that version of myself again. I was sitting on my balcony with Lara, she had her head on my shoulder, and we weren't talking, just listening to the distant hum of the city and the wind moving through the trees, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. I didn't feel like I had to apologize for the past, or defend who I had become. She knew enough of my story to understand, but not so much that she ever treated me like I was broken or fragile. She saw the men in front of her, not the man I used to be. And that was everything. Sometimes people think closure comes when the other person says sorry, or when you get revenge, or when you win something you lost before, but I don't believe that anymore. Closure, real closure, comes when you realize that someone's power over you is gone, not because they gave it up, but because you stopped handing it to them. When Emily left, I thought it was the end of everything. But it was really just the beginning. I look back now and I don't feel hate anymore, I don't feel bitterness, I feel gratitude, and I know that sounds insane considering what she did, but it's true. She broke me, yes. But breaking me forced me to rebuild from the ground up. And when you rebuild something with your own hands, when you dig yourself out of the ashes, you don't forget who threw the match, but you also don't need to keep staring at the fire. You move on. You rise. A few months after that last awkward encounter with Emily at the event, I heard she'd moved out of the city, Brandon had divorced her, and apparently, he'd taken her to court over prenups and fraud allegations. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't even care. By then, I was somewhere else, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I'd started mentoring young entrepreneurs, not just about business, but about resilience, about what to do when everything falls apart, about how to rebuild your identity when the people you trusted turn their backs. I shared my story, not as a warning, but as a reminder that even when you lose everything, you haven't lost yourself, not really, not if you're willing to fight to find your way back. One of the kids I mentored said something that stuck with me. He said, "You don't talk like a CEO, you talk like someone who's been through war." I laughed at that, but he wasn't wrong. Love can be a battlefield too. Not just the kind with screaming matches and slammed doors, but the quieter kind, the war inside your own head, where you start questioning your worth, where you wonder if maybe they were right, maybe you really were a failure, a disappointment, a loser. I lived in that battlefield for a long time. And coming out of it changed how I see everything. Now, success doesn't mean the same thing to me anymore. It's not about the cars, or the money, or the public image. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving me right. It's about being able to look in the mirror and know that the man looking back is whole, not because he never broke, but because he did, and he put the pieces back together anyway. Laura and I took a trip one weekend, nothing extravagant, just a cabin upstate surrounded by trees and silence. We cooked meals together, played old records, danced barefoot on the wooden floor, and talked about the kind of future that didn't involve titles or status, just connection, growth, and peace. One night, sitting by the fireplace, she looked at me and said, "You know, you're not the man most people would expect behind that empire of yours." I smiled. That's because I didn't build it to impress them. I built it to save myself. She leaned in and kissed my forehead and said, "Well, it worked." And for once, I believed her. It's funny, I used to think that getting even with Emily would be the climax of my story. But it wasn't. It was just a chapter. The real climax, the real turning point, was choosing not to let the chapter define the rest of the book. I don't tell this story because I want pity, or applause, or validation. I tell it because there are people out there right now, sitting alone in the dark, wondering how it all fell apart, questioning if they'll ever feel whole again. To those people, I say this. You will rise. You will survive. And one day, you'll thank the version of yourself who refused to stay down. Not because the pain was worth it, but because you were worth healing. I don't know where Emily is now. I don't need to. Her chapter in my life is over, and the final page was written not when she cheated, or when she left, or even when I sent that video. It was written the day I looked in the mirror and no longer saw men trying to prove something. Just a man at peace. And that, my friend, is the freedom I didn't know I needed.